1845 Prohibited Portrait of a Slave Auction in Charleston. Hidden Truths. The humid Charleston morning hung heavy with the weight of history as Dr. Rebecca Morrison carefully examined the contents of the Whitfield Estate's attic. As a historian specializing in antebellum South Carolina, she had been called in to assess the historical value of documents and artifacts left behind by the recently deceased Judge Harold Whitfield, whose family had been prominent in Charleston society for over 2 centuries. Among dusty legal documents and faded family portraits, Rebecca's fingers brushed against something that made her heart skip a beat. Hidden beneath a stack of yellowed newspapers from the 1820s was a daguerreotype unlike anything she had ever seen. The silver-plated copper sheet bore an image so shocking, so historically significant, that she immediately understood why it had been hidden away for nearly 2 centuries. The photograph depicted a slave auction in vivid, heartbreaking detail. On a wooden platform stood several African Americans, men, women, and what appeared to be children, their faces etched with exhaustion and despair. Heavy chains bound their wrists and ankles, while their eyes held a mixture of fear, defiance, and resignation that transcended the limitations of the photographic medium. Below the platform, a crowd of well-dressed white men in top hats and formal attire pointed and gestured, their faces animated with the casual interest of buyers examining livestock. The background revealed the unmistakable architecture of Charleston's historic district, with its distinctive colonial buildings and weathered flags hanging limply in the still air. The daguerreotype itself showed clear signs of age and concealment. The emulsion bore several cracks, and the edges were worn from handling, but these imperfections only added to its authenticity. Small spots of tarnish created dark patches across the surface, while the silver backing had developed a characteristic mirror-like quality that marked genuine daguerreotypes from the earth. Rebecca's hands trembled as she held the image. In all her years of research, she had never encountered a contemporary photograph of a slave auction. Such images were extraordinarily rare, as the practice was considered too sensitive even by the standards of the antebellum South to be openly documented. Most slave auctions were recorded only in written accounts, advertisements, and occasional sketches by visiting journalists or abolitionists. The technical quality of the photograph suggested it had been taken by a skilled practitioner of the daguerreotype process. The composition was carefully arranged, with the subjects positioned to capture maximum detail, despite the limitations of early photographic technology. The exposure time, likely several minutes given the technology of 1845, had been managed expertly to minimize motion blur while capturing the stark reality of the scene. The lighting in the photograph revealed the photographer's expertise in working with natural illumination. The harsh southern sun had been used to create dramatic contrasts that emphasized the emotional weight of the scene. Shadows fell across the faces of the enslaved individuals in ways that seemed to accentuate their suffering, while the bright light illuminating the buyers created an almost theatrical effect that highlighted their casual indifference to the human tragedy unfolding before them. In the corner of the daguerreotype, barely visible, unless examined closely, were the initials called M.W. etched into the silver surface. Rebecca recognized this as the photographer's mark, a common practice among daguerreotypists of the era who took pride in their work despite the controversial nature of some subjects. As she continued her examination, Rebecca noticed something else that made her pulse quicken. Tucked behind the daguerreotype was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age and bearing what appeared to be a contemporary account of the auction depicted in the photograph. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, as if the author had been writing in secret or under pressure. The document began, Charleston, South Carolina, March 15, 1845. You have today witnessed and documented an event that will surely stand as one of the darkest chapters in our nation's history. The auction of human souls proceeds with the same casual efficiency as the sale of cattle, and I fear that future generations will judge us harshly for our participation in this abomination. Rebecca carefully set the daguerreotype aside and unfolded the document completely. It appeared to be a detailed account of the auction, including names, prices paid, and observations about the individuals being sold. More importantly, it seemed to be written by someone with access to the auction, but who harbored serious moral objections to the proceeding. The document contained disturbing details about the examination process that preceded the auction. The author described how potential buyers had inspected the enslaved individuals like livestock, checking their teeth, muscles, and overall health. Women and young girls had been subjected to particularly invasive examinations, with the document noting the author's disgust at witnessing such dehumanizing treatment. One passage was particularly haunting. A young mother, perhaps no more than 18 years of age, clutched her infant child to her breast as men discussed whether they would purchase them together or separately. The terror in her eyes, as she realized her child might be torn from her arms, was perhaps the most heartbreaking sight I have ever witnessed. Yet the buyers discussed this possibility with no more emotion than they might show when deciding whether to purchase a horse with or without its saddle. The discovery was potentially explosive. Not only was this likely the only known photograph of an actual slave auction from the antebellum period, but it was accompanied by what appeared to be a first-hand account that could provide unprecedented insight into the mechanics and human cost of the slave trade in Charleston, one of the largest slave ports in North America. Rebecca's mind raced with the implication. The photograph and accompanying document could revolutionize understanding of the slave trade, providing visual and written evidence that had been hidden for nearly 2 centuries. But she also understood the sensitivity of such a discovery and the need for careful, respectful handling of materials that depicted such profound human suffering. The attic around her seemed to hold its breath as she contemplated the magnitude of her discovery. Dust motes dancing the afternoon sunlight streaming through a small window, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that seemed inappropriate given the gravity of what she had found. The contrast between the peaceful setting and the horrific contents of the daguerreotype struck her as emblematic of how the horrors of slavery had been hidden beneath the veneer of Southern gentility. As she prepared to leave the Whitfield estate, Rebecca carefully wrapped the daguerreotype in document and acid-free tissue paper. She knew that her discovery would require extensive authentication, historical research, and consultation with experts in African American history, photography, and the antebellum South. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders as she realized she was now the guardian of a piece of history that had been deliberately hidden, likely because it was too damning, too real, too honest about the brutal reality of slavery in America. The forbidden portrait would soon force the world to confront truths that had been buried for generations. Walking through the grand rooms of the Whitfield mansion on her way out, Rebecca couldn't help but notice the elegant furnishings, the fine art, and the obvious wealth that surrounded her. She wondered how much of this prosperity had been built on the suffering depicted in the daguerreotype she now carried. The irony was not lost on her. That evidence of slavery's brutality had been hidden in the very house that had likely been built with profits from the slave trade. Back in her office at the College of Charleston, Dr. Rebecca Morrison spread the daguerreotypic and accompanying document across her desk under carefully controlled lighting. The magnitude of her discovery was becoming clearer with each detail she examined, but she knew that authentication would be crucial before she could share her findings with the academic community. Her first call was to Dr. Marcus Thompson, a leading expert in mid-20th century photography at the Smithsonian Institution. When she described her discovery, the silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute. "Rebecca, if what you're describing is authentic, you found something that historians have been searching for since the Civil War," Marcus finally said. "There are no known photographs of actual slave auctions from that period. The closest we have are some sketches and paintings created years later." "I need you to see this in person," Rebecca replied. "The technical aspects, the composition, the aging patterns, Everything suggests authenticity, but I want your expert opinion before we proceed. Marcus arrived to Charleston the following day, bringing with him specialized equipment for analyzing daguerreotypes. His examination was meticulous, using magnification tools, spectral analysis equipment, and chemical tests to verify the age and authenticity of both the silver plate and the image itself. The process of authentication was complex and time-consuming. Marcus examined every aspect of the daguerreotype, from the composition of the silver plate to the specific techniques used in the photographic process. He analyzed the tarnish patterns, which developed in predictable ways over time, and compared the image quality to other verified daguerreotypes from the same period. The silver composition is consistent with daguerreotypes from the Atienzo on Puentes. Marcus confirmed after several hours of analysis. The tarnish patterns, the way the emulsion has aged, the type of case it was stored in, everything points to this being a genuine period piece. But Rebecca, the subject matter, this is going to change everything we thought we knew about visual documentation of slavery. The technical analysis revealed additional details about the photographer's skill and the circumstances under which the image was created. The exposure time had been calculated precisely to capture both the movement of the crowd and the stillness of the enslaved individuals on the platform. The depth of field suggested that the photographer had positioned the camera at a considerable distance, likely to avoid detection. While Marcus continued his technical analysis, Rebecca focused on the written document that had accompanied the photograph. The paper was clearly period appropriate, and the ink had faded in patterns consistent with documents from the Atienzo. More importantly, the content provided details that could be cross-referenced with historical record. The document identified the location as Chalmers Street, near the old Exchange Building, a known site for slave auctions in Charleston. It listed specific names of both buyers and sellers, many of whom Rebecca recognized from her research into Charleston's antebellum merchant class. The level of detail suggested that the author had been present at the auction and had access to information that would not have been available to a casual observer. One passage particularly caught Rebecca's attention. The photographer, Mr. J. Whitmore, worked with remarkable discretion, positioning his apparatus behind a partially opened window of the building across the street. His courage in documenting this scene cannot be overstated, as discovery would surely result in violence against both himself and his equipment. Whitmore, Rebecca murmured, making notes. The initial on the daguerreotype are Joe M. W. You need to research this photographer. Her investigation into Joe M. Whitmore revealed a fascinating and complex figure. Josiah Marcus Whitmore had been a traveling daguerreotypist who worked throughout the South, in the 1840 South. Unlike many of his contemporaries who focused on portraits of wealthy families, Whitmore seemed to have been drawn to documenting social conditions and historical events. Records from the Charleston City Directory of 1845 showed that Whitmore had maintained a temporary studio on Broad Street for several months that year. Newspaper advertisements from the period promoted his services for portraits and documentary images of historical significance. The advertisements were carefully worded, avoiding any explicit mention of controversial subjects, while hinting at Whitmore's willingness to document events that other photographers might avoid. More intriguingly, Rebecca discovered that Whitmore had connections to the abolitionist movement. Letters preserved in the Massachusetts Historical Society revealed correspondence between Whitmore and prominent abolitionists, including Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison. In one letter, Whitmore wrote, "I believe that the camera can be a powerful weapon against injustice, capturing truths that words alone cannot convey." The correspondence revealed that Whitmore's interest in photography had been motivated by more than artistic or commercial considerations. He saw the new medium as a tool for social reform, capable of providing irrefutable evidence of injustices that could be denied or minimized when described only in words. The written account accompanying the daguerreotype was signed with the initials, leading Rebecca to suspect it might have been written by a member of Whitmore's family or an associate. Further research revealed that Whitmore had traveled with his younger brother, Ezra Whitmore, who served as his assistant and often documented the circumstances surrounding their photographic work. Ezra's role appeared to have been crucial to the success of their documentation effort. While Hosea focused on the technical aspects of photography, Ezra served as a scout, gathering information about upcoming events and identifying safe locations from which to work. His written accounts provided context that made the photographs more valuable as historical documents. As Rebecca delved deeper into the historical context, she began to understand why the daguerreotype had been hidden for so long. The image was not just a documentation of a slave auction. It was evidence of the systematic dehumanization that formed the economic foundation of Charleston society. The casual demeanor of the buyers, the obvious suffering of the enslaved individuals, and the public nature of the proceedings all combined to create a visual indictment of slavery that would have been explosive in a ounce of one pint. To create a visual indictment of slavery that would have been explosive in the technical achievement represented by the daguerreotype was also remarkable. Photographing a slave auction would have required careful planning, as the process involved heavy equipment and long exposure time. The fact that Whitmore had managed to capture the scene without detection suggested both technical skill and considerable personal courage. Rebecca's research revealed that slave auctions in Charleston were typically held on specific days and at designated locations, with the Chalmers Street area being one of the most active sites. The auctions were public events, advertised in newspapers and attended by buyers from across the South. The casual nature of these proceedings, as captured in the daguerreotype, reflected how normalized the buying and selling of human beings had become in Charleston society. The document accompanying the photograph provided additional context that made the image even more powerful. It described the ages and apparent origins of the individuals being sold, the prices they commanded, and the reactions of both buyers and the enslaved people themselves. One particularly heartbreaking passage described a young mother being separated from her child, with the document noting the woman's cries could be heard above the auctioneer's voice, yet the proceedings continued without pause or acknowledgement of her anguish. As Rebecca prepared to share her findings with other scholars, she grappled with the ethical implications of her discovery. The daguerreotype depicted real people at one of the most traumatic moments of their life. How could she honor their memory while using their suffering to educate others about the realities of slavery? She decided to reach out to Dr. Amelia Washington, a prominent African-American historian and expert on slavery in South Carolina. Washington's perspective would be crucial in determining how to present this discovery in a way that respected the dignity of the individuals depicted while maximizing its educational and historical value. The forbidden portrait was about to emerge from nearly 2 centuries of concealment, bringing with it truths that would challenge comfortable narratives about America's past and force a new reckoning with the brutal realities of slavery. Amelia Washington's reaction to the daguerreotype was immediate and visceral. As one of the foremost experts on slavery in the antebellum South, she had studied countless documents, artifacts, and testimonies related to the slave trade, but she had never seen anything quite like this. "This is extraordinary, Rebecca," she said, her voice thick with emotion as she examined the image. "These faces, these are real people whose stories have been lost to history. This photograph gives them back their humanity in a way that no written account ever could." Washington's expertise proved invaluable in interpreting the details visible in the daguerreotype. She could identify specific aspects of the clothing, chains, and positioning that reveal information about the conditions and procedures of slave auctions that had previously been known only through written accounts. "Look at the way they're arranged on the platform," she pointed out. "The younger, stronger individuals are positioned prominently, while the older people and children are placed toward the back. This was a deliberate staging designed to maximize the visual impact for potential buyers." The arrangement also revealed the cruel efficiency of the slave trade. Washington explained how auctioneers would group in enslaved individuals to create the most appealing lots for buyers, often separating family members in the process. The daguerreotype captured this systematic dehumanization in stark visual terms that no written description could match. As they continued their analysis, Rebecca shared her research on J.M. Whitmore, the photographer. Washington was particularly interested in the connections between Whitmore and the abolitionist movement, as it provided crucial context for understanding why this particular image had been created. Whitmore wasn't just documenting history, Dr. Washington observed. He was creating evidence. This daguerreotype was meant to be proof of the horrors of slavery, visual testimony that could be used to support the abolitionist cause. Their research into Whitmore's background revealed a man driven by a sense of moral purpose that was unusual for his time and profession. Born in Massachusetts to a family with Quaker influences, Whitmore had been exposed to abolitionist ideas from an early age. His decision to become a traveling photographer had been motivated partly by a desire to document social conditions throughout the country. The Quaker influence in Whitmore's upbringing was particularly significant. The Religious Society of Friends had been among the earliest and most consistent opponents of slavery in America, and their emphasis on the inherent dignity of all human beings had clearly shaped Whitmore's worldview. His correspondent revealed a deep spiritual commitment to using his skills as a photographer to bear witness to injustice. Letters discovered in various archives revealed that Whitmore had been in correspondence with several prominent abolitionists, including Harriet Beecher Stowe, who was working on Uncle Tom's Cabin during the same period. In one letter, Whitmore wrote, "Words alone cannot convey the full horror of what I have witnessed. The camera, however, captures truth in a way that cannot be denied or dismissed." The timing of Whitmore's work was particularly significant. The 1940s were a period of intense national debate over slavery, with tensions rising between North and South that would eventually lead to civil war. Visual evidence of slavery's brutality could have been explosive in this charged political environment, which explained why the daguerreotype had been hidden for so long. The document accompanying the daguerreotype, which they had determined was written by Ezra Whitmore, provided additional insight into the circumstances surrounding the photograph. Ezra's account revealed that the brothers had spent weeks in Charleston, carefully observing the patterns and locations of slave auctions before attempting to photograph one. The risk they took was enormous, Dr. Washington noted. If they had been discovered, they could have faced violence or even death. The fact that they succeeded in creating this image speaks to both their technical skill and their commitment to their cause. The account described how Hosea Whitmore had positioned his camera in a second-story window across from the auction site, using a long exposure to capture the scene while remaining hidden from view. The technical challenges would have been significant, as daguerreotype cameras were large and conspicuous, and the process required precise timing and steady conditions. Ezra's document also provided disturbing details about the auction itself. It described how the enslaved individuals were examined by potential buyers, how families were separated, and how the auctioneer conducted the proceedings with casual efficiency. One passage was particularly haunting. A young woman, perhaps no more than 16, was made to stand alone on the platform while men examined her as they would a horse. Her dignity in the face of such degradation was both heartbreaking and inspiring. The document revealed additional layers of cruelty that were not immediately apparent in the daguerreotype itself. Ezra described how enslaved individuals were often forced to perform for potential buyers, demonstrating their strength or skills. Children were made to show their teeth and run short distances to prove their health, while adults were required to lift heavy objects or perform other physical tasks. As Rebecca and Dr. Washington delved deeper into the historical context, they discovered that the auction depicted in the daguerreotype had taken place during a particularly active period in Charleston's slave trade. The spring of 1845, had seen increased demand for enslaved labor due to expanding cotton production, and Charleston's markets had been flooded with people being sold to meet this demand. The research also revealed the identities of some of the individuals visible in the photograph. Cross-referencing Ezra's detailed account with newspaper testaments and sales records, they were able to identify several of the buyers and even some of the enslaved individuals being sold. One particularly significant discovery was the identification of a young man visible in the center of the platform. According to Ezra's account, this was Samuel, aged approximately 20, sold for $1,000 to a plantation owner from Georgia. Further research revealed that Samuel had eventually escaped from slavery and made his way north, where he had become an active participant in the Underground Railroad. This adds another layer to the photograph's significance, Dr. Washington explained. We're not just looking at victims, we're seeing people who would go on to resist and fight back against the system that oppressed them. The discovery of Samuel's later history led to additional research that revealed the fates of several other individuals visible in the daguerreotype. While many of their stories remained lost to history, the researchers were able to trace the lives of a few, including a woman named Mary, who had eventually purchased her own freedom and that of her children. These discoveries transformed the daguerreotype from a static image of suffering into a dynamic record of human resilience and resistance. The individuals depicted were not merely victims, but complex human beings who had found ways to maintain their dignity and fight for their freedom despite the dehumanizing circumstances they faced. As word of the discovery began to spread within academic circles, Rebecca and Dr. Washington found themselves grappling with questions about how to present their findings to the public. The daguerreotype was undoubtedly a significant historical discovery, but it also depicted real people at their most vulnerable moment. We have a responsibility to these individuals, Washington emphasized. This photograph must be used to educate and honor their memory, not to sensationalize their suffering. They decided to approach the revelation of the daguerreotype carefully, working with museums, educational institutions, and descendant communities to ensure that the image would be presented with appropriate context and respect. The forbidden portrait was beginning to reveal its secrets, but each answer only raised new questions about the hidden truths of America's past and the courage of those who had risked everything to document them. The deeper Rebecca and Washington dug into the story behind the daguerreotype, the more they realized they had uncovered evidence of a sophisticated network of abolitionists who had been working to document and expose the realities of slavery in the South. The Whitmore brothers were not isolated actors, but part of a coordinated effort to gather visual evidence that could be used to support the anti-slavery cause. Their investigation led them to the archives of the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society, where they discovered a cache of letters that had been sealed for over a century. The correspondence revealed that Josiah Whitmore had been commissioned by a group of prominent abolitionists to travel throughout the South and create a visual record of slavery's impact on both the enslaved and the broader society. One letter, dated February 1845, provided explicit instructions for Whitmore's mission. Your camera must serve as our eyes and conscience, capture not only the obvious cruelties, but also the casual acceptance of evil that pervades Southern society. Show the world what we have only been able to describe in words. The letter was signed by William Lloyd Garrison, the prominent abolitionist and publisher of the Liberator. This connection explained how Whitmore had been able to finance his dangerous mission and why he had been willing to take such extraordinary risks. The correspondence revealed that the abolitionist movement had recognized the potential power of photography as a tool for social change. Visual evidence could reach audiences that might dismiss written accounts as biased or exaggerated. A photograph, they believed, could not lie in the way that words might be twisted or misinterpreted. Washington's research revealed that the network extended beyond the Whitmore brothers and their abolitionist sponsors. They discovered evidence of a sophisticated support system that had helped Whitmore move safely through the South, providing him with cover stories, safe houses, and local contacts who could help him identify significant events to document. This wasn't just one photographer working alone, Washington explained. This was a coordinated intelligence operation designed to gather evidence that could be used to expose the truth about slavery to the world. The document written by Ezra Wetmore contained coded references that, when decoded using techniques common among abolitionists of the period, revealed the names and locations of other individuals who had assisted in their mission. Some of these people were free blacks, who had risked their lives to provide information about upcoming auctions and other events. Others were white Southerners who had become disillusioned with slavery and were secretly working to undermine the system. One particularly significant figure was a Charleston merchant named Thomas Grimke, a member of the prominent Grimke family that had produced several notable abolitionists. Thomas had apparently provided the Whitmore brothers with information about the timing and location of slave auctions, as well as access to buildings where they could position their camera equipment without detection. The Grimke family's involvement added another layer of complexity to the story. While some members of the family had become prominent abolitionists, others remained deeply embedded in Charleston's slave-owning society. Thomas Grimke's assistance to the Whitmore brothers represented a dangerous betrayal of his social class and could have resulted in social ostracism, financial ruin, or worse if discovered. The research also revealed that the daguerreotype of the slave auction was not the only image Whitmore had created during his time in Charleston. References in various documents suggested that he had photographed other aspects of slavery, including plantation conditions, slave quarters, and even punishment scenes. However, these other images had apparently been lost or destroyed over time. The survival of this one daguerreotype may be miraculous, Rebecca noted. It's possible that dozens of similar images were created but didn't survive the passage of time, or were deliberately destroyed to hide the evidence they contained. The destruction of photographic evidence appeared to have been systematic. As tensions between North and South escalated in the 1850s, many Southern communities had become increasingly sensitive to outside documentation of slavery. Photographers suspected of abolitionist sympathies were often run out of town, and their equipment and images were destroyed. As they continued their research, Rebecca and Dr. Washington discovered that the network of abolitionist documentarians had extended far beyond the Whitmore brothers. They found evidence of other photographers, artists, and writers who had been working to create a comprehensive record of slavery's impact on American society. One particularly intriguing discovery was a reference to a woman named Sarah Mapps Douglas, a free black educator and artist from Philadelphia, who had apparently worked with the network to help interpret and contextualize the images being created. Her letters revealed sophisticated discussions about how visual evidence could be used most effectively to change public opinion about slavery. We must remember that the camera does not lie, but it can be made to tell different stories depending on how the images are presented, Douglas had written. Our challenge is to ensure that these photographs speak truth to power and cannot be dismissed or misinterpreted by those who would defend the indefensible. Douglas's involvement highlighted the important role that free blacks played in the abolitionist movement's documentation effort. Their unique position, neither enslaved nor fully accepted in white society, gave them access to information and perspectives that were crucial to understanding the full impact of slavery. The investigation also revealed the dangerous consequences faced by those who participated in this documentation efforts. Several members of the network had been discovered and faced severe punishment, including imprisonment, physical violence, and in some cases death. The risks were particularly high for free blacks and enslaved individuals who provided assistance, as they faced the constant threat of being sold into slavery or worse. One tragic discovery was the fate of a man named Jupiter Hammond, a free black carpenter in Charleston, who had helped the Whitmore brothers gain access to buildings overlooking auction sites. According to documents found in the Charleston City archives, Hammond had been arrested in late 1945 on charges of inciting rebellion and had died in custody under suspicious circumstances. These people were heroes, Dr. Washington said, her voice heavy with emotion. They risked everything to ensure that the truth about slavery would be preserved for future generations. We owe it to them to tell their stories along with the story of this photograph. The research revealed that Hammond had been part of a larger network of free blacks in Charleston, who provided intelligence and assistance to abolitionists. Despite the constant danger they faced, these individuals had continued their work because they understood that documentation of slavery's horrors was essential to the eventual abolition of the system. The research also revealed that the daguerreotype had been hidden deliberately after Whitmore's death. According to family letters, Josiah Whitmore had contracted yellow fever while working in New Orleans and had died before he could complete his mission of documenting slavery throughout the South. His brother Ezra had inherited his photographic equipment and images, but had been forced to hide them due to increasing tensions between North and South. The daguerreotype had eventually come into the possession of the Whitfield family through a complex series of inheritance and sales. Those Carlod Whitfield's ancestors had apparently purchased it as part of a larger collection of historical documents, possibly without fully understanding its significance or controversial nature. The irony is remarkable. Rebecca observed, a photograph taken to expose the horrors of slavery ended up hidden in the attic of a family that had likely profited from the slave trade themselves. The Whitfield family's acquisition of the daguerreotype represented a common pattern in the post-Civil War South, where evidence of slavery's brutality was often hidden or destroyed by those who had participated in or profited from the system. The survival of the image was therefore even more remarkable, representing a victory for historical truth over those who would have preferred to bury the evidence of their crimes. As their research continued, Rebecca and Dr. Washington began to understand that the daguerreotype was more than just a historical artifact. It was evidence of a hidden history of resistance and documentation that had been largely forgotten. The forbidden portrait was beginning to reveal not just the truth about a single slave auction, but the existence of an entire network of people who had risked their lives to ensure that the truth about slavery would survive for future generations. As news of the daguerreotype's discovery began to circulate within academic circles, Rebecca and Dr. Washington found themselves at the center of intense debate about how such a powerful and disturbing image should be presented to the public. The photograph's authenticity had been confirmed by multiple experts, but questions remained about the ethical implications of displaying an image that depicted real people at their most vulnerable moment. The debate intensified when Dr. James Rutledge, a historian from the University of South Carolina, who specialized in lost cause mythology, challenged both the authenticity and the interpretation of the daguerreotype. In a letter published in the Journal of Southern History, Rutledge argued that the image was either a fake or had been taken out of context to support an anti-Southern agenda. Morrison's so-called established conveniently supports every negative stereotype about the antebellum South, Rutledge wrote. I find it highly suspicious that such a damning piece of evidence would surface just as our understanding of slavery has become more nuanced and complex. Rutledge's challenge represented a broader resistance within certain academic circles to confronting the full brutality of slavery. His arguments echoed those of lost cause historians who had spent decades minimizing the horrors of slavery and romanticizing the antebellum South. The discovery of visual evidence that contradicted these comfortable narratives was clearly threatening to those who had invested their careers in defending them. Rebecca was prepared for such challenges. Working with Marcus Thompson and other photography experts, she had compiled extensive technical evidence supporting the daguerreotype's authenticity. Chemical analysis of the silver plate, examination of the aging patterns, and comparison with other verified daguerreotypes from the same period all confirmed that the image was genuine. The technical evidence was overwhelming. Spectroscopic analysis of the silver plate revealed composition patterns consistent with daguerreotypes from the Ocean to Santos Cuentes. The tarnish patterns followed predictable chemical processes that would have been impossible to fake. Even the cracks in the emulsion showed aging characteristics that could only have developed over decades of storage. More importantly, Washington had discovered additional corroborating evidence in the form of newspaper accounts and personal diaries that described the specific auction depicted in the photograph. A diary entry from a Charleston merchant named William Aiken, dated March 16, 1845, described attending a particularly large auction on Chalmers Street that matched the details visible in the daguerreotype. The evidence is overwhelming, Washington stated in a response to Rutledge's challenge. This photograph is not only authentic, but represents one of the most important historical discoveries of our time. To dismiss it, because it challenges comfortable narratives about the past, is to do a disservice to both historical truth and the memory of those who suffered under slavery. The controversy surrounding the daguerreotype's authenticity was overshadowed by larger questions about how to present such a disturbing image to the public. Museum directors, educators, and community leaders struggled with the challenge of using the photograph to educate about slavery's realities while respecting the dignity of the individuals depicted. The ethical considerations were complex and multifaceted. How could the image be displayed without exploiting the suffering of the individuals depicted? How could it be used to educate without traumatizing viewers? How could the historical significance be conveyed while maintaining appropriate respect for the victims of slavery? Angela Davis, the renowned scholar and activist, weighed in on the debate during a symposium at the Smithsonian Institution. This photograph forces us to confront the visual reality of slavery in a way that written accounts cannot. But we must be careful not to exploit the suffering of our ancestors for educational purposes. The image must be presented with appropriate context and respect. Davis's intervention helped frame the debate in more productive terms. Rather than arguing about whether the image should be displayed, the focus shifted to how it could be presented in ways that honored the memory of those depicted while maximizing its educational value. Rebecca and Dr. Washington worked closely with descendant communities and cultural institutions to develop guidelines for displaying the daguerreotype. They insisted that the image never be shown without extensive historical context and that visitors be prepared for its emotional impact through appropriate warnings and support resources. The guidelines they developed became a model for how sensitive historical materials should be presented. They require that the daguerreotype be displayed with detailed information about the individuals depicted, the historical context of the action, and the broader system of slavery that made such events possible. Visitors would be warned about the disturbing nature of the image and provided with resources for processing their emotional responses. The research team also made a crucial decision to focus not just on the suffering depicted in the photograph, but on the courage and resistance of both the enslaved individuals and those who had risked their lives to document their stories. The exhibition would tell the complete story of the abolitionist network that had made the photograph possible, honoring the memory of people like Jupiter Hammond and others who had paid the ultimate price for their commitment to truth. This approach helped to transform the daguerreotype from a simple documentation of suffering into a more complex narrative about resistance, courage, and the power of truth to survive even the most determined efforts to suppress it. The image became not just evidence of slavery's horrors, but testimony to the human capacity for moral courage in the face of overwhelming evil. As preparations for the public unveiling continued, Rebecca received an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Dorothy Samuel, an elderly African-American woman from Atlanta, had read about the discovery in a newspaper article and had traveled to Charleston to see the daguerreotype for herself. "My great-great-grandfather was named Samuel," she told Rebecca. "Family stories say he was sold at a slave auction in Charleston in 1845 and later escaped to freedom. I wonder if he might be in your photograph." Rebecca and Dr. Washington carefully showed Miss Samuel the daguerreotype and the accompanying documentation. When they pointed out the young man identified as Samuel in Ezra Whitmore's account, Mrs. Samuel began to cry. "That's him," she whispered. "I have a photograph of him from when he was older, and the resemblance is unmistakable. This is my ancestor." The discovery that they had found a living descendant of one of the individuals in the photograph added a profound new dimension to their work. Samuel shared family stories that had been passed down through generations, including details about Samuel's escape from slavery and his later work with the Underground Railroad. He always told his children that someday the truth about slavery would be fully revealed, Mrs. Samuel said. They believed that the stories of enslaved people would eventually be heard and honored. "I think he would be proud to know that his image is helping to educate people about what really happened." Samuel's family stories provided additional context that enriched the understanding of the daguerreotype. She described how Samuel had spoken about the auction where he was sold, including details that matched what was visible in the photograph. Her presence transformed the image from a historical artifact into a living connection to the past. Mrs. Samuel's presence at the unveiling ceremony became a powerful symbol of the connection between past and present. Her family's oral history provided additional context for understanding the photograph and helped humanize the individuals depicted in it. The public unveiling of the daguerreotype took place at the International African American Museum in Charleston, a location chosen for its commitment to telling the complete story of the African American experience. The exhibition, titled Hidden Truths, Visual Evidence of Slavery in America, presented the photograph within a comprehensive historical context that included information about the abolitionist network, the technical challenges of early photography, and the ongoing impact of slavery on American society. The response was overwhelming. Visitors from around the world came to see the daguerreotype, many leaving deeply moved by the experience of confronting the visual reality of slavery. Educational programs developed around the exhibition reached thousands of students, while scholarly conferences explored the implications of the discovery for understanding American history. But perhaps the most significant impact was on the descendants of enslaved people who saw their ancestors' experiences validated and honored in a new way. The daguerreotype had given faces and names to people who had been reduced to statistics and historical accounts, restoring their humanity and ensuring that their stories would not be forgotten. The forbidden portrait had finally emerged from its hiding place, bringing with it truths that challenged comfortable narratives about America's past, while honoring the memory of those who had suffered and those who had risked everything to document their suffering. 6 months after the public unveiling of the daguerreotype, the impact of the discovery continued to reverberate through academic institutions, museums, and communities across the United States. The image had become a powerful symbol of both the horrors of slavery and the courage of those who had worked to document and resist it. Dr. Rebecca Morrison found herself at the center of a transformed understanding of how visual evidence could reshape historical narratives. The daguerreotype had not only provided unprecedented documentation of a slave auction, but had also revealed the existence of a sophisticated network of abolitionists who had used early photography as a tool of resistance and documentation. The success of the Charleston exhibition had led to requests from museums worldwide to display the daguerreotype. Rebecca and Doc Washington had developed strict protocols for its exhibition, ensuring that the image was always presented with appropriate historical context and respect for the individuals depicted. Each venue was required to provide educational programming that explored both the historical significance of the photograph and its contemporary relevance. The international response to the daguerreotype had been particularly significant. Museums in London, Paris, and Berlin had requested permission to display the image as part of exhibitions about slavery and human rights. The photograph had become a universal symbol of the struggle against dehumanization and oppression, resonating with audiences far beyond the American context in which it was created. One of the most significant developments was the establishment of the Whitmore Institute for Visual, a research center dedicated to discovering and preserving photographic evidence of historical and funded by a coalition of universities, museums, and private donors. the Institute had already begun uncovering other hidden photographs and documents related to slavery, segregation, and civil rights. Hosea Whitmore's courage in creating this photograph has inspired a new generation of researchers and activists. Rebecca explained during the Institute's inaugural ceremony. His belief that the camera could serve as a weapon against injustice continues to guide our work today. The Institute's mission had expanded beyond simply collecting historical photographs. Researchers were working to develop new methodologies for authenticating historical images, creating databases of visual evidence, and training scholars to recognize and preserve photographic materials that might otherwise be lost or destroyed. The Institute's first major project involved a comprehensive search for other images created by the Abolitionist Photography Network. Using the names and connections discovered through their research on the Whitmore brothers, researchers had identified several other photographers who had worked to document slavery and its aftermath. One particularly exciting discovery was a catch of daguerreotypes found in the basement of a church in Boston. The images, created by a photographer named Marcus Johnson, documented conditions in slave quarters on plantations throughout the South. While not as dramatic as the auction scene captured by Whitmore, these images provided valuable evidence about the daily lives of enslaved people. Dr. Washington had taken a leadership role in developing educational curricula based on the daguerreotype and the broader story it revealed. Working with the National Tuition Association, she had created lesson plans that used the photograph to teach students about primary source analysis, the complexity of historical narratives, and the ongoing impact of slavery on American society. This photograph forces students to confront the reality that history is not just about dates and events, Dr. Washington explained. It's about real people who experienced joy and suffering, who resisted oppression and fought for justice. When students see the faces in this image, they understand that history is personal and immediate. The educational impact of the daguerreotype had been profound. Teachers reported that students who studied the image developed a deeper understanding of slavery's brutality and a greater appreciation for the courage of those who had fought against it. The photograph had become a powerful tool for combating historical denial and promoting honest discussions about America's past. The discovery had also sparked a new research into the role of photography in social justice movement. Scholars had begun examining how visual evidence had been used throughout American history to document injustices and advocate for change, from the daguerreotype of the slave auction to contemporary images of police brutality and immigration enforcement. This research had revealed a continuous tradition of using photography as a tool for social change. From the Civil War photographs of Matthew Brady to the civil rights images of the 1960s, visual evidence had played a crucial role in shaping public opinion and promoting social reform. The Whitmore daguerreotype represents an orderly and particularly courageous example of this tradition. Mrs. Dorothy Samuel had become an important voice in these discussions, sharing her family's oral history and advocating for the inclusion of descendant perspectives in historical research. Her great-great-grandfather's story had been incorporated into the permanent exhibition, providing a powerful example of how enslaved individuals had resisted their circumstances and fought for freedom. Samuel's story doesn't end with the auction, Mrs. Samuel often told visitors. It begins there. This photograph shows him at his lowest moment, but he went on to help dozens of other people escape slavery through the Underground Railroad. His legacy is not victimhood, but resistance and hope. Miss Samuel's advocacy had led to the creation of a descendant advisory committee that worked with the museum to ensure that the stories of enslaved people were told with accuracy and respect. The committee had become a model for how museums could work with descendant communities to present difficult stories in ways that honored the memory of those who had suffered while educating contemporary audiences. The impact of the daguerreotype extended beyond academic and museum circles. The image had been incorporated into legal arguments about reparations for slavery. with advocates arguing that visual evidence of slavery's brutality strengthened the case for addressing its ongoing consequences. Civil rights organizations had used the photograph in campaigns to combat contemporary forms of racial injustice, drawing connections between historical and present-day struggles. The legal implications of the discovery had been particularly significant. The daguerreotype provided irrefutable evidence of slavery's systematic brutality, contradicting arguments that the institution had been benevolent or that its horrors had been exaggerated. This evidence had been cited in several court cases involving reparations and civil rights, helping to establish the historical foundation for contemporary claims of injustice. The discovery had also influenced artistic and cultural expressions of historical memory. Several prominent artists had created works inspired by the daguerreotype, while filmmakers and writers had drawn on the story of the Whitmore brothers and their abolitionist network for new creative projects. One particularly powerful development was the creation of a memorial garden at the site of the former slave auction depicted in the photograph. The garden, designed in collaboration with descendant communities and local artists, honored both the individuals who had been sold at the auction and those who had worked to document and resist slavery. The memorial included reproductions of the daguerreotype and excerpts from Ezra Whitmore's account, along with information about the broader abolitionist network and the ongoing struggle for racial justice. A central sculpture created by renowned artist Kara Walker depicted figures breaking free from chains while reaching toward the sky, symbolizing both the suffering and the resilience of enslaved people. The memorial had become a site of pilgrimage for people from around the world who came to honor the memory of those who had suffered under slavery and those who had fought against it. The garden provided a space for reflection and education, helping visitors understand the historical significance of the site and its connection to contemporary struggles for justice. As Rebecca reflected on the years since her discovery, she was struck by how a single photograph had opened up entirely new avenues for understanding American history. The daguerreotype had not only documented a specific moment in time, but had revealed hidden networks of resistance and documentation that had been largely forgotten. The forbidden portrait has taught us that there are still truths waiting to be discovered. Rebecca wrote in her final report on the project, "Every attic, every archive, every family collection may contain evidence that could transform our understanding of the past. Our responsibility is to seek out these hidden truths and ensure that they are preserved and shared with respect and integrity." The daguerreotype itself had been permanently acquired by the Smithsonian Institution, where it would be preserved using the most advanced conservation techniques available. But copies and digital reproductions ensured that the image would continue to educate and inspire people around the world. The preservation efforts had been particularly important given the fragile nature of daguerreotypes. The Smithsonian's conservation team had worked to stabilize the image and prevent further deterioration while maintaining its historical authenticity. Advanced digital imaging techniques had captured every detail of the photograph, ensuring that future researchers would have access to the complete visual record even if the original continued to deteriorate. Washington had been appointed as the first director of the Smithsonian's new Center for Visual History and Social Justice, a position that would allow her to continue expanding on the work that had begun with the discovery of the daguerreotype. Her first initiative involved training a new generation of historians and archivists to recognize and preserve visual evidence of historical injustices. The center had become a model for how academic institutions could combine rigorous scholarship with social justice advocacy. Its work had inspired similar initiatives at universities and museums around the world, creating a global network of scholars and activists committed to using visual evidence to promote understanding and justice. The story of the forbidden portrait had become more than just a historical discovery. It had become a call to action for those committed to uncovering and confronting difficult truths about America's past. The courage of Josiah and Ezra Whitmore, Jupiter Hammond, and countless others who had risked their lives to document the reality of slavery, continue to inspire contemporary efforts to use visual evidence in the fight for justice. As visitors continue to file past the daguerreotype in its new home at the Smithsonian, many were moved to tears by the power of the image and the stories it represented. In the faces of the enslaved individuals on the auction platform, they saw not just victims of historical injustice, but human beings whose dignity and humanity had survived even the most dehumanizing circumstances. The forbidden portrait had finally found its voice, speaking truths that had been hidden for nearly 2 centuries and ensuring that the stories of those who had suffered and those who had fought against injustice would never be forgotten. In revealing the hidden truths of 1835, the daguerreotype had also illuminated the ongoing struggle for justice and equality that continued to define American society. The legacy of the forbidden portrait would endure, serving as a reminder that the camera could indeed serve as a weapon against injustice, and that the truth, no matter how long hidden, would eventually find a way to emerge into the light. The discovery of the 1845 daguerreotype of a Charleston slave auction had far-reaching consequences that extended well beyond the academic and museum communities. The image became a catalyst for renewed discussions about slavery's legacy, the importance of preserving difficult histories, and the power of visual evidence to transform understanding of the past. In the years following the discovery, the Whitmore Institute for Visual History uncovered dozens of other hidden photographs and documents related to slavery and its aftermath. These discoveries helped create a more complete visual record of American slavery, providing evidence that complemented and sometimes challenged existing historical narratives. The educational impact of the daguerreotype was particularly significant. Students who encountered the image in classrooms and museums often reported that it changed their understanding of slavery from an abstract, historical concept to a visceral reality involving real people who had experienced unimaginable suffering and demonstrated remarkable resilience. The photograph also inspired new research methodologies that emphasized the importance of visual evidence in historical scholarship. Graduate programs in history began requiring courses in visual analysis, while museums developed new approaches to exhibiting difficult histories that balanced educational goals with respect for those depicted in historical images. The international impact of the discovery had been equally significant. The daguerreotype had been featured in exhibitions and educational programs around the world, helping to promote global understanding of slavery's impact and the ongoing struggle for human rights. The image had become a universal symbol of resistance to oppression and the power of truth to survive even the most determined efforts to suppress it. Perhaps most importantly, the discovery had demonstrated that hidden truths about America's past were still waiting to be uncovered. The forbidden portrait of 1845 had emerged from concealment to speak truth that challenged comfortable narratives and honored the memory of those who had been forgotten by official histories. The daguerreotype continued to serve as a powerful reminder that the struggle for justice and equality was ongoing, and that the courage of those who had documented and resisted historical injustices could continue to inspire contemporary efforts to create a more just and equitable society. The technical innovations developed for preserving and studying the daguerreotype had also advanced the field of photographic conservation. New techniques for stabilizing deteriorating images and extracting maximum information from damaged photographs had been developed, benefiting preservation efforts for historical photographs around the world. The descendant community that had formed around the discovery had become a powerful force for historical education and social justice. Led by Miss Dorothy Samuel and others, this community had worked to ensure that the stories of enslaved people were told with accuracy and respect, while also drawing connections between historical injustices and contemporary struggles for equality. In the end, the forbidden portrait had achieved what Josiah Whitmore had hoped when he risked his life to create it. It had forced the world to confront the visual reality of slavery and had ensured that the stories of those who had suffered under this system would never be forgotten. The hidden truths of 1845 had finally been revealed, and their impact would continue to resonate for generations to come. The daguerreotype had become more than a historical artifact. It had become a living testament to the power of truth, the importance of bearing witness to injustice, and the enduring human capacity for courage in the face of overwhelming evil. Its legacy would continue to inspire those who believed that understanding the past was essential to creating a more just future.